Today, I once again mentioned our interlocutors, Mr. Cassis and Mr. Sinalioglu, who spoke about the functioning of these institutes, including the OSCE Institute for Freedom of Mass Media. When Russia again agreed to sign a peace treaty with Ukraine, after the Minsk agreements, when NATO and the United States rejected our proposal for a new European security system, when we had no other choice but a special military operation, and when the Ukrainians proposed negotiations 2 or 3 weeks later, we agreed to them. And in Istanbul, at the beginning of April, we agreed to support the principle of settlement proposed by the Ukrainian side. 2 or 3 days after this document was approved, a tragedy took place in Bucha, when the BBC group arrived and began to show the central street of this suburb, where tens of bodies were neatly laid out. Bucha was raised around this village, and immediately, without any investigation, a new package of sanctions against the Russian Federation was announced. This was in April 2022. Since then, we have been asking the UN Secretary-General during my public speeches at the UN Security Council, and all journalists accredited in New York, at the Organization of Daily Nations, with whom I regularly meet when I am there to hold press conferences, and the OSCE leadership. The question is very simple. This story of the mass murder in the village of Bucha is no longer mentioned by any means of mass media. You see, they have already reached the Epstein Island, but the hands do not reach Bucha. The question we ask journalists is very simple. Please, as UN employees, as employees of respected mass media, request a list of the names of those persons whose bodies were shown to the BBC 4 years ago. I know many people in New York, those who are accredited at the Organization of Daily Nations. I used to address my old acquaintances and say, guys, you have some kind of journalistic pride. After all, sometimes people start digging into anything. In particular, it is very fashionable to dig into the question why Russia is not interested in achieving peace. This is an abstraction that can be answered endlessly, and this question can be asked endlessly. And here is the simplest thing. Who was killed in Bucha? Why can't we get the names? The General Secretary, Mr. Guterres, along with his High Commissioner for Human Rights, whispers something unclearly, takes his eyes away, hints that there are some ethical norms that do not allow these names to be announced. And what are these ethical norms? Let them explain why they do not do this. I am again calling on journalists, primarily Western journalists, because this scandal was spread precisely in the Western media. Try to ask the Ukrainian leadership, or the leadership of the BBC. They probably know who to contact to remember the details of that story. Therefore, there is no need to constantly follow the example of all sorts of Rutz, von der Leyen, and Zelensky. They will lie for a cheap price. And now you see, the topic of stopping the fire, and at the same time guaranteeing Ukraine's security, as Zelensky demands, these guarantees should be approved in parliaments in the United States Congress, otherwise it will not be serious. Well, in general, the master expresses his wishes to everyone else. The security guarantees, once again, I will address you in April 2022, they were agreed upon on the basis of the projects proposed by the Ukrainian side. And those security guarantees provided that the security of the entire region, including Ukraine, will be guaranteed. And the country's guarantors will be 5 permanent members of the Security Council, that is, including Russia and China, plus Germany, Turkey. It was a Ukrainian proposal. And there, according to the Ukrainian proposal, it was written that these guarantors will work on the basis of common consent, and any decisions will be made only by consensus, and that there will be no military bases in Ukraine, there will be no military exercises in Ukraine without the consent of all guarantor countries, that is, including Russia and China. These security guarantees were contained in a document that was approved, and that we were ready to sign 4 years ago. To make such a legal agreement on its basis. Now, you probably, no one has shown it to us, maybe our delegation, which went to Abu Dhabi for the second time, was informed that it was being discussed. There, I have not yet had the opportunity to talk to them. Yesterday, we were already with our Swiss colleagues engaged in negotiations, and today, in the morning. But what leaks to the press, and what does not even leak? And Ryuta said, speaking in the parliament, in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, means that an intervention is being prepared. He said that security guarantees provide automatic actions of the coalition of those who wish, at one stage on their own, and at another stage, with the support of the United States, that Britain and France are ready to place their troops on Ukrainian territory. That is, everything is exactly the opposite, compared to those collective guarantees that we and the Ukrainians agreed on in April 2022. Then it was fair. And now, these are guarantees of security of the regime that the West wants to preserve at any cost, as long as it continues to bite the Russian Federation, and as long as it continues to provide its territory for the deployment of Western weapons. It is clear that the conversation is not serious, but few people now remember about that period. You know, these are awkward questions why they do not give names, awkward questions why the Ukrainians were forbidden 4 years ago to sign the peace treaty of Russia, which had already been paraphrased. This is not the case. History is cancelled. History begins where it is convenient for our Western colleagues. This is how it was after the coup in February 2014, when, in violation of the agreement guaranteed by Germany, France and Poland, the putschists captured the administrative buildings in the morning, declared themselves victors, began to hunt for the then president, and the first such loud signal about themselves they sent right on the day of the seizure of power. They said, "We will cancel the status of the Russian language." And secondly, they sent the militants to storm the buildings of Crimea. And then the Crimeans said, "We do not want to have anything in common with you." They held a referendum, declared independence, and then joined the Russian Federation. When the West began to discuss all this before the special military operation, the Minsk agreements, the formats that were created, the role of the OCE, they kept saying, well, it all started from the fact that you occupied, annexed Crimea. We say, wait a minute. But the coup d'etat, contrary to the guarantees that the EU members gave, no, it does not matter. What was before the referendum in Crimea, it's all cancelled. The West is ashamed of it. Or maybe not ashamed, but just by his usual habit, does not want to talk about a topic where he has no arguments. Therefore, it is necessary to see the history in all its diversity, including the primary cause of all conflicts. I will finish with a quote. We also talked about this today with our interlocutors. The People's Republic of China has put forward a number of major initiatives, recently the Global Governance and the Global Security Initiative. It was formulated by President Xi Jinping in February, I think, 2023. It contains, regardless of any specific situation, the principle of resolving any conflict. And one of these principles is very clearly formulated. When approaching any conflict, it is necessary to carefully, specifically understand its primary causes. Having determined its primary causes, it is necessary to concentrate all efforts on resolving them. Only on this basis can conflicts be resolved. We fully agree with this assessment by the leaders of the People's Republic of China. And it is this approach that we apply in relation to the conflict that was created by our Western colleagues for many years, by turning Ukraine into an anti-Russia and an instrument of war against our country. The meeting was useful. I hope that all our discussions will not be in vain. Thank you.